Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Iconoclastic Monastic. This is my third episode, and I'm joined here today, all the way from Sri Lanka, by Bhante Akāliko. So thank you, Bhante, for being here. And I just want to share some real, just quick information about Bhante. So Bhante Akāliko is an Australian monk in the Theravada forest tradition. He is the spiritual director of Little Dust and founder of Rainbodhi LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community. Bhante has previously served as a chaplain at Western Sydney University and sat on the boards of Buddhist Council of NSW and the Federation of Australian Buddhist Council. Bhante went forth in 2016 and received full ordination with Ajahn Brahm. I love Ajahn Brahm at Bodhayana Monastery in 2017. He lived for several years with Bhante Sujato. I also love Bhante Sujato at the monastery at the end of the world in Sydney, and now lives as a wandering monk looking for a place to settle and shake off the dust in Sri Lanka. And then I also want to share a little bit a little introduction about Bhante's project, about Rainbodhi LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community. Rainbodhi is an international spiritual friendship group for LGBTQIA+ Buddhists and an advocate for inclusion and diversity. They offer meditation, teachings, discussion, and social events in a safe, affirming environment for people from all Buddhist traditions and those interested in Buddhism and meditation. Rainbodhi welcomes people of all shades, ethnicities, sexes, genders, sexualities, body shapes, abilities, and cultural identities. All Rainbodhi events are free of charge, which is amazing. The Dhamma should always be free. So Bhante, once again, thank you for being here. And, if I missed anything in those very general introductions that you would like to share with us that you want to highlight, please do, Bhante. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Venerable. It's really nice to be with you. And thank you for inviting me to talk about one aspect of my work, which is Rainbodhi. Thank you for giving the spiel as well. And I was just thinking as I was listening to you, I was wondering, Venerable, have you ever felt unsafe or unwelcome in your Buddhist communities because of your gender or your sexuality? Have you?
No, I honestly, when it comes to those two identities of gender and sexuality, never. And I think because they've both always been assumed, I think that's a big thing, so they've always been assumed. So I think that's one protective factor in my experience. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So it's interesting to think about people who maybe don't feel safe or don't feel welcome in their Buddhist communities. And so that's something that I've been discovering is a truth in Buddhism for people who belong to the LGBTQIA+ community. And it's kind of like a sad thing for me to realize, actually, that for some people, those spaces that a lot of other people like yourself perhaps go into are not welcoming or are not safe. And that's why I started Rainbodhi almost 4 years ago. So Rainbodhi started off in Sydney, and it's just a small group of spiritual friends. And now we have groups in Canada, USA, Poland, Spain, Singapore, Melbourne, and also Sydney. And so there's obviously been some growth there, and that growth is based on a need to have a community where people feel like they belong. And so that's why Rainbodhi exists. Did you know, Bhante, that Buddhism has a queer history?
What history, Bhante?
A queer history, an LGBTQIA history.
Not really, Bhante. I really don't have never really kind of looked into the topic, so I don't really know.
Well, I mean, just think about it. Like, queer people just didn't suddenly appear.
That's true. Yeah.
We've always been here.
Yeah.
There's always been same-sex attracted people. There's always been bi people. There's always been people who play around with gender. There's always been intersex people.
Yes.
So of course, In Buddhism, there's been queer people, there's been queer monks, queer lay supporters, queer teachers. Of course, there's been people who have translated Buddhist texts who are queer. And so there's a queer history of Buddhists. But for some reason, we find that a little bit surprising, right? Like, oh, didn't really think about that. But of course, we exist. We have been a big part of Buddhism, and we belong. We belong in Buddhism. And for some reason, we've got this idea, perhaps in Buddhist circles, you see it all the time. We can talk about it. Some people don't think that it's spiritual to be queer, that being queer belongs in Buddhism, that there can be queer Buddhists, that we can talk about things that affect those people and talk about it through a Buddhist lens, talk about it in Buddhist spaces. So for a lot of people who are queer, we've received this idea of religion that is very much against people from our community. And for some reason, this has infiltrated Buddhist circles too, whether it's due to things like colonialism. Here in Sri Lanka, of course, there was a very different culture before colonialism. And here it's still illegal to be gay. And so some of these imposed religious morals from Christian religion have impacted Sri Lankans' social sphere. And this has in turn had an impact on the religiosity of Buddhists and attitudes towards queer people. So this idea of there being a history of queers being a part of Buddhism, and this other view of, oh no, we can't talk about those issues. Don't identify with your sexuality. Don't talk about gender. Like there's a bit of a discrepancy there that I want to explore with you as we go along today. And the reason for that, I realize I'm talking a lot. The reason for that is because we actually did some research a few years ago that I just want to mention. And this was done by an academic who is named Dr. Stephen Carey, and they work at Charles Darwin University. And they looked at LGBTQIA+ Buddhists in Australia. They did a rigorous research project, and the results were things like 61% of queer Buddhists feel that Buddhist centers, retreat places, temples, monasteries, 61% of people surveyed said that those places silence or ignore queer issues, queer people. It's quite a lot, right? It's like these people, their lives are queer, their relationships are queer, their understanding of spirituality is queer, and yet the places that they go to don't want those parts of them to be present, don't want to acknowledge or embrace, welcome, affirm those parts of themselves. And for most of us, when we go to a temple or monastery, we don't ever think, what parts of myself do I need to leave behind? You never think, should I just not disclose who I am to these people? 55% said that they were reluctant to disclose their identity. Like over half of the people that go to these temples had some fear of rejection, of not being welcome, of it negatively impacting them. And again, this is something that, straight or cisgendered people don't have to worry about, right? 40%, almost 40% had experienced homophobia at their temple, at their retreat center, at their monastery. There's about 25% who had experienced transphobia. Of course, there was also racism and sexism. And another statistic was that 16% had been told that their gender or their sexuality was inconsistent with Buddhist teachings. And so this is just in Australia. I think that in countries like Sri Lanka or Thailand or Burma, where Buddhism is a strongly conservative social force, I think that the figures might be even higher. We have this idea in the West, especially, that Buddhism is more progressive, doesn't have a problem with queer people. The reality is slightly different, actually. The reality is that there is homophobia, there is transphobia, and that it's quite explicit at times and also very subtle at other times. But in what we call traditional Buddhist countries, it's even worse. And so it's just something that I wanted to acknowledge, those statistics. It's really important to actually listen to queer people when they talk about their experiences. I think a lot of Buddhists who are straight or cisgendered, they just assume that because they're safe and they feel welcome and accepted by their spiritual communities, they just assume that it's the case for everybody. And sometimes they'll say, I've never seen any homophobia. And it's like, well, that's because you're straight. But you should listen to the people who are impacted by things like homophobia or transphobia. And if they're saying this exists, then we have to acknowledge it and we have to deal with it. Because otherwise, people are getting locked out of our spiritual communities.
Bhante, thank you so much for bringing this to light. You know that I do a lot of work in the Spanish-speaking community throughout Latin America. And many of them have said that the reason, they're looking towards Buddhism is because they've encountered these problems in their native, religion that they grew up with. And then, to come across the same thing over again must be so painful, to re-experience it and feel like there's nowhere you can go. Like, I'm going to this other place that's, as we think in the West, very progressive, and you just end up running into the same systems, same discrimination, same all over and over and over and over again. And yeah, Bhante, like, I didn't know the numbers, those numbers, and I'm sure they're probably the same in the US and in traditional Buddhist countries, like you said, Bhante. From what I've seen and heard, I'm pretty much sure that it's a lot worse in the within the traditional circles, Bhante.
Yeah, so it's a bit sad, isn't it? And I think the fundamental truth of what you just said is kind of like double, we've got left one religion because it was against me just for existing, go to another religion and we find out that there's all this kind of stuff happening, often below the surface, not very explicit in the same way that it happens in with Christianity, for example, or Islam, for example. But the truth is that because of ignorance, because of hate, queer people are never safe when it comes to religion. And this is something that, for me, is not just distressing because it's unfair and unjust, but because queer people are spiritual people and their spirituality is queer. It's a part of them. And to have to make this choice between a fundamental part of yourself that you were born with and your religious practice is something that people should never be asked to make. It's something that straight or cisgendered people never have to think about. Or, actually, maybe they do, depending on their religion. But it's something that is an unfair thing to load onto queer people's shoulders. Like this question of, do you really belong here? Is this for you? It's a terrible thing to do to someone, because especially for people who've experienced marginalization, violence, discrimination, prejudice. They're looking for a spiritual solution to their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we say to those people when they come to our spiritual centers, you can't bring that stuff with you, then we're just denying their lived experience and an opportunity for them to understand their lived experience through a spiritual lens.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you probably have heaps of people come to you and talk about all sorts of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that one of the monasteries I was at, we used to have people come along. They talk about their jobs. They have questions about their family. They'll talk about their marriage, their parents, their in-laws. They'll come and they'll ask for things like blessings for their boxing match. And these things are all regarded as completely okay to talk about. No one even bats an eyelid if someone starts talking about their marriage or their kids. But the moment someone starts talking about their gender or their sexuality, or difficulties they have in their relationships, or their experience of discrimination, they're labeled, being woke or trying to impose identity politics and all this kind of stuff. It's a very unfair double standard that queer people are silenced and they can't talk about things that affect them in their spiritual communities, because that's what spiritual communities are for, to talk about the things that people are experiencing in their life. The Buddha didn't ever have any taboos about what topics were appropriate. He talked about cleaning the toilets, talked about advising kings on their diets, talked about war, talked with sex workers, outcasts, and he never said, mustn't talk about that, it's not spiritual. And so, it's really strange that for some reason being queer is seen as something outside the realm of Buddhism. And we see it over and over again. And this is the very subtle homophobia that happens in our communities. 55% not wanting to disclose their gender or their sexuality. 61% feeling that their Buddhist centers silence and ignore queer issues. It's a really unfair and unfortunate thing that's happening, because in the end, those people will just end up leaving Buddhism because they feel like they don't belong.
Yes, Bhante, that's true. I came across a very kind of sad situation where a former monastic, had went through like this kind of experience, basically kind of got pushed out, and all kinds of horrible things were being said, and people are trying to leverage some text, non-canonical text against this person. And so I had never even considered it. Like, you're right, Bhante. Like, I didn't even think about it. And then once it started playing out, I was like, this is horrible. Like, I would have never imagined the people that are saying this, that they would say this, like, to hear this come out of these people. And within certain contexts, they seem very nice in general, but like within this specific context, like they just became someone else, and like it was just such a difficult thing to see this dissonance, right? Like this dissonance and play out.
And I think that cognitive dissonance is a curse of religious people generally. You see people sitting down practicing metta, sending love to the entire world, and then spouting hate at the bus driver or at the waiter, or being mean to their partner or something. So this idea that Buddhists often have of themselves is that they're good people, righteous people, and that they are wise people who understand the teachings. But there's often this blind spot, which for them is a great loss, because it means they cannot see themselves clearly. If they cannot see themselves clearly, they can't work on their hate. They can't work on their ignorance. And so it's a very sad thing that these good people cannot see the harm that they're doing. And actually, when this harm is repeated, it becomes abuse, spiritual abuse. And this is something that we see in our religious communities, that this shutting down, telling people don't identify with your sexuality, don't talk about your gender, don't discuss your issues. This is actually a form of abuse, and it needs to be labeled as such, because the effect on those people is really horrendous. It makes them feel that they don't belong, that they're not safe, that the things that are innate to them, like my blue eyes, my sexuality is the same thing. I was born queer. I've got blue eyes. You wouldn't ask me to take my eyes out to visit the monastery. And, these things are part of themselves. And again, this double standard is really interesting. Like, I also have people trying to shut me down all the time, saying that this isn't something that you should identify with. And, you just said before, you're working with Spanish-speaking communities, which I think great, wonderful. And in a Sri Lankan temple, right? And I follow the Thai forest tradition. We identify as Theravadan monastics. There's plenty of identification going on. No one ever has any difficulty at all accepting that I am an Australian monk. But if I talk about being queer, it's somehow really controversial. At least being queer is something I was born with, right? Being Australian, whatever. Being a Spanish speaker, this is stuff that we learned, right? And so, so this is part of why Rainbodhi exists, not only to provide a safe and affirming community space for people once in a while just to come from their regular spiritual places, come together with their queer community, make sure that they can be their full selves and talk about issues that affect them, talk about queer issues in a spiritual way with Buddhist teachings. This is why Rainbodhi exists, for that community. But there's also this advocacy piece, which is busting some myths, helping people understand what homophobia looks like, what transphobia is, helping communities understand the structural issues that they have in their systems, like their booking systems or their accommodation, and helping them understand how it locks our community out, helping people understand language and concepts. This is part of Rainbodhi's work, to help people understand. Because there are some people who just don't have the right information at the right time, and they want to grow. They want to be good people. They want to be good Buddhists, but out of sometimes ignorance, they don't have the right information to be kind, to not cause harm. Then there's other people who are trolls, who are bigots, who are consciously displaying hate, attacking our community. And they're doing it feeling justified because they're spiritually superior somehow. And this is something that I was really astonished to discover exists in Buddhism, both in Asian countries and also in Western countries.
Yes, Bhante. And, I think that, they say image has 1,000 words or something like that's the saying, right? An image carries 1,000 words. And I'm so happy that, you brought this kind of topic of trolling, because, it doesn't only happen in, this kind of physical world, but it's, it's exported into the virtual world too, right? which now is more invasive than the actual real world. I mean, you can lock your doors, you can close your windows, but like, you know, to escape the virtual world is very difficult. Like we live more virtually now in some sense that we do in like in actual space, right? Especially for like if you want to practice the Dharma, maybe you don't have a local space, so your place of refuge is online, and then to be confronted with all this hate, right, and being closed off online. So like I don't have a place near me in physical space, so I don't have a place online either. Like, where do I go then? Yeah, it's such a terrible situation. And Bhante, I wanted to take the opportunity right now to share some of these kind of, images that you see that you yourself and Rainbodhi have seen for themselves. So I'm gonna put this in the screen. Can you see it, Bhante?
I can, and we should just do a bit of a content warning for our viewers, just to let you know that there's going to be some depictions of queerphobia. Some of them are quite gross, and just to let viewers know that this stuff that we're viewing now is just a small fraction of trolling that happened only in the last week after one of our former speakers shared a Rainbodhi post. And this is what happened. There was a bit of brigading going on where people kind of got organized to attack the post and to leave hundreds and hundreds, and I kid you not, hundreds and hundreds of comments. And a lot of the words that we use were things like sick and get mental health and things like that. But as you say, the images are kind of more powerful, right? So these are good Buddhists, right? These people who think that they're good Buddhists, and they have a problem with queer people, but they have no problem at all using the image of a Buddha and changing it into a Buddha with his middle finger being up. You know, it's like this idea of themselves is really weird, right? Like they can do this, they can be this hateful, but they can't see it as being like against the Buddhist teachings, you know?
Yes, I mean, this image says it all, altering the image of the Buddha Rupa, to make the image an image of hate.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful, the Buddha is like the personification of loving kindness and compassion, and now you make him into the opposite.
I know, right? Because they feel justified somehow. And they feel entitled to be able to do this because it's against a community that for some reason still has to struggle to be safe and belong. For some reason is still a target. And we see this image of the black boot, which is of course a fascist image. And this black boot trampling the rainbow flag. And, you know, that's like a warning, you know. This is also kind of imagery that we associate a lot with the alt-right. And there has been quite a lot of alt-right hate against Rainbodhi as well in the past.
Yes, Bhante, and I'm gonna try to share another image now. This is a comment, I think.
That's right, and this was a comment on Rainbodhi's a post on a forum about Rainbodhi, and you'd be surprised to find out, Venerable, that forums are a hotbed of queerphobia. It's very easy to get online and post stuff without having to actually listen to other people. So this person is saying, what is the reason for putting this topic in Buddhism? I doubt Buddha would support such activities for the name of Buddhism, especially for monastics. And I think this is one of those situations that we talked about before, about how we have this idea that LGBTQIA plus issues somehow don't belong in spirituality. And if you ever go to Buddhist forums, you see people talking about all sorts of things, about aliens, about Trump, about politics, about wars, and no one ever says this isn't spiritual enough, and yet when it comes to queer people, for some reason, it doesn't belong.
Yes, Bhante.
Anyway.
Very, very sad. And then here we have another screenshot. This is a comment that they made, right? To the picture.
Yeah. Can you read it?
Degradation of Buddhism in Australia. Sad emoji.
Sad face. Yeah. So this is at our launch 4 years ago. This is with Venerable Ayya Yeshe, who's a nun, a bhikkhuni in the Himalayan tradition.
She's awesome.
And yeah, she's also a little bit radical, right? But again, this is a monk making this comment, right? And I don't know him. I've got no idea who he is. I don't know why he became so obsessed about Rainbodhi that he needed to take the time out of his life and try to condemn us on the internet and say that we're somehow degrading Buddhism. So this, for me, really shows what queerphobia is. Like, there is a fear there. It's definitely based on fear, a fear that queers will destroy your religion merely by existing. And of course, this is absurd. And as I said, there's always been queers in Buddhism. There's always been queer people. We're not trying to destroy the religion. In fact, I think if anyone's going to destroy it, it's people who are full of hate and who go around doing things like saying that monks and nuns or queer Buddhists are somehow destroying their religion. This is not true. It's a little bit crazy. And again, it just points to that residual queerphobia that exists in society that people are bringing into Buddhism. It has no place here.
Yes, Bhante. And then here's a more graphic kind of comments, images.
Yeah, so like pissing on the rainbow flag. And I guess this just goes to show that not only a Buddhist, not only a queer people, discriminated against, oppressed, like this is the kind of attitude people will bring. This is how people feel. And like we've left these people's names up. These are all public posts. These people had no problem doing this kind of hate in public using their names. It's kind of, for me, it's just like, wow, you didn't even bother to disguise yourself. And yeah, so it's a little bit, for me, a little bit bemusing. And again, these people think of themselves as Buddhists, Anyway.
Then we have some other comments here.
Yeah, so these kind of images popped up time and time again in the comments. Keep your country clean. So there's this kind of like weird nationalism, right? Yeah. Keep your country clean. You can identify with, what is it? I've heard some of those American politicians say, my pronouns are USA. And it's like, wow, you can identify with your country, but you can't identify with your sexuality or your gender. It's kind of weird, right? And of course, like this is just like an image of trash, but it's a warning. This is about a threat. This is about harm.
We got another one here.
Yeah, please find alternative ways to disappoint your father. And the one above it, you are, what does it say? You are sick. Go get some treatment. This is a thing that we find over and over again. That and this more trolling that I've received through Rainbodhi. Even just a couple of weeks ago, someone messaging me saying that queers are defective, are sick, are dysfunctional. And this is a kind of language that is used to oppress and other, to make it out that somehow we are unnatural, there's something wrong with us. And because of this view, they feel justified in bringing this hate to bear on our community. Whereas the truth is something quite different. Being queer is completely natural, much more natural than hate.
Yes.
Hate is learnt, socially constructed. And
You've never seen a baby that came out hateful, Bhante. Babies are always very loving and kind.
Yeah, there is the anusaya of patiga there, but at the same time, like this hatred that is cultivated towards our queer community is socially constructed. We know that in different communities at different times, it's been fine to be bi, it's been fine to be queer, it's been fine to be trans. We know that at certain times in our history, there's been no problem. But this kind of hate is socially constructed. And this is really extreme. Like, these messages are really extreme, right? You should kill yourself. And we know that the queer community has a higher percentage of suicide because of things like rejection, discrimination, because of violence, bullying. And so this is what is happening here. This is bullying. This is violence. And this is coming from Buddhists. And the image below, of course, the gun pointed at the viewer with a rainbow flag. Again, these are people who consider themselves Buddhists and somehow defenders of the faith. And they're kind of monstrous in their hate. So yeah, so this is the kind of stuff. Maybe we can stop. I'm kind of a bit over these images now. These are the kind of things that we actually receive as queer people and are exposed to time and time again. Venerable, I haven't mentioned this to you yet, but you'll probably have to turn the comments off on this video, because people feel safe and justified to leave vicious comments. And one of the sad things about doing that is that you end up also cutting out a lot of the positive comments as well. So you can leave the comments on, but just, if you're inviting people into your space to welcome them and to talk about these things, to share it with our queer community, then you have to take care of those people who are looking at these comments as well, because everything like that is triggering, brings back a lot of memories of bullying, of not belonging, of not being safe. And so those kinds of trolls, like, they exist. Do you want to know about another one? There's one who we just found out about recently, who has become obsessed about Rainbodhi. And it almost made it like their lifestyle to hate on Rainbodhi. And they've created all these accounts on Twitter and YouTube and other places. And they have made all these videos. And I'm just like, wow, like, how much time? Like, I don't have time to make videos for the people I love and care about. Like, who has time to make videos for people you hate, right? And this weird, I'd say almost like sick obsession with other people's sex life or their gender or their spirituality, like, pretty strange, don't you think? To become obsessed and to spend your time developing a mind full of hate towards others. I mean, often these people are actually mentally unstable and they're paranoid, or they've got this weird conceit that they're somehow, better than everyone else, and that they want to show the world the true way, or who knows what's going on through their minds. But when I think about these people, these trolls, these weirdly obsessed critics, I feel so sad. You know, they're so far removed from the Buddha's teachings, so far removed. And they have a mind of hate that they can't see. And they kind of dig themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth, going further and further into the darkness with this hate, in this hate-filled hole. And they're so far away from the love, the kindness, the compassion taught by the Buddha. And so, you know, for me, like when I think about these people, I feel incredibly sad for them, that they've perverted their spiritual path through a mind of ignorance and hate. And, you know, my love for them is vast. You know, my compassion for them is vast. And that hate of theirs is so small, so cramped, so horrid. But the Buddha taught a love that fills the universe. And that love will always overpower hate. And this is the path that I try to follow in response to these trolls, this homophobia. You know, there's probably nothing much we can do for these people, but give them some love and give them some compassion and hope that they learn to be kind.
Bhante, can you tell us a little bit about the activities that you've been involved in? It says meditations, it says like all these other things. Can you highlight some of these, you know, this remarkable work that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. So that's all been pretty heavy and sad and horrid so far. But actually, Rainbodhi has been pretty fun at the same time. And so, yeah, we have different types of activities. Remember, it's a spiritual friendship group. So it's not like a center. It's not like a whole new religion. We're not a separatist movement. And basically, I know, right? These are also some of the accusations everybody has had, you know. People are like, oh no, I don't like it when they create their own groups. And it's like, you know what? Like there's Thai temples, there's Spanish-speaking groups, there's women in Buddhism. Like, it's fine. Don't let it worry you too much. But the reason, of course, is because there's like discrimination, prejudice, violence, and hate in some of our Buddhist centers. So that's the reason. If you don't like it, then be compassionate. And so, yeah, we have a lot of different types of events. So in-person events, we do things like go and meditate in the Botanic Gardens and maybe do a lunch or something afterwards. This week in Sydney, there's a cemetery visit to an exhibition that's in a cemetery. And one of our community members, Kath Fries, she's the curator of this exhibition. And so she and some of the Buddhist queer artists who are involved in the exhibition are giving a tour of the exhibition for Rainbodhi, which is really nice. In Singapore, they'll do things like go and visit some of the different temples around. And we also have things like online events where we'll do some meditation, have a Dharma talk, maybe have some breakout sessions. We'll have some panel discussions and things like that. The ethos for me with Rainbodhi is it's queer and it's Buddhist. So it's about being queer, it's about being Buddhist. And these things together is what makes Rainbodhi. And so it's pretty narrow focus for our activities. And of course, we encourage people to continue their spiritual practice with other communities as well. So it's a chance for people to come together with spiritual friends who understand them and support them, to be who they are authentically, to embrace their whole self.
Mhm.
And our role is to really amplify queer Buddhist voices
Mhm.
and to celebrate our queer Buddhist spirituality. And so to do that, we really need to center our queer Buddhist voices and experiences.
Mhm.
So the speaker is always queer and Buddhist, and everyone, of course, is welcome. Straight people are welcome. Cisgendered people are welcome. But they should come expecting to hear a queer Buddhist perspective, just like we have been today, me chewing your ear off, Venerable. So that's some of the activities we do. And in addition to those kind of social and meditation and Dharma activities, I was just remembering there's also things like study groups that have popped up and regular meditation sessions
Mhm.
as well in some areas. There's a Spanish speaking group, Rainbodhi España, who is not just limiting themselves to Spain, but reaching out to Spanish-speaking Buddhist queer communities all over the world.
Mhm.
And they'll be launching actually their first event
Mhm.
on the 9th of December.
Mhm.
So you can find out more about that on Rainbodhi España's page on our website. That's the kind of social and friendship and spiritual stuff. And then there's the advocacy work,
Mhm.
which is through things like our Rainbodhi inclusivity resource, Welcoming the Rainbow,
Mhm.
which has now been translated into Dutch, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Thai,
Mhm.
and I think German and Chinese languages are coming up soon. And so this is how we decided to help educate our community, because of course it's quite tiring
Mhm.
and boring to always have to talk about the same things over and over again. And it's also quite difficult for people who are impacted on an individual level
Mhm.
by their community to advocate for themselves. As we've discovered, we become targets when we talk about these issues. We become targets of oppression, silence, prejudice. We become targets of hate. I've received death threats
Mhm.
for this kind of work. And so the booklet was a way to get that information out into the world in a way that was accessible. And I was surprised actually at how popular it's been,
Mhm.
because people just didn't have a resource and they want to do the right thing by their queer communities. There is a lot of care. There are a lot of allies
Mhm.
in our Buddhist community. I think a lot of them, like you, are surprised to discover what kind of things are going on beneath the
Mhm.
surface of our good meditation practicing communities, right? And we needed some tools to help people understand what was going on. So this booklet
Mhm.
has been published, and thousands of copies have been printed, and it's available online on our website as well. And I really encourage people to have a look at it, especially if you're on a committee for a Buddhist temple or monastery or retreat center, or if you're in charge of those places. Have a look and just see if you can learn about ways that you might unintentionally be causing harm,
Mhm.
excluding members of our community.
Mhm.
And what else do we do?
Well, how can we support you, Bhante? How can we support Rainbodhi? Like, what can we do as individuals, as monastics, as leaders, as a culture altogether? Like, what are some of the steps that we can take? Mhm.
Thank you for asking. So the first thing to do is to care,
Yeah.
right? Like, just care about people in your community who are not you.
Mhm.
Like, you think it would be pretty basic, this idea that we should care about others. And unfortunately, this is still a problem, that it's difficult for people to make that leap of compassion and kindness towards other beings. It's still difficult for people to do that. Being able to do this is actually a sign of spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
Caring about others is a sign of spiritual growth. And not just caring in a kind of fridge magnet kind of way, like love everyone, but actually walking the talk.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it means if you hear something that's homophobic, you stand up for that person who's been impacted, and you take this issue up with those people who are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You report videos, or you report grotesque trolling comments. You actually have to stand up and be counted. And this is what an ally is. It's someone who does some of this work for those people who are being harmed, because for those people it's really hard to do that work all the time. So a good ally is someone who's like, yeah, I'm going to help out. And maybe that ally can go to their spiritual communities, to the committees and leaders, and say, what are you doing to protect your queer community? What are you doing to make sure they're welcome? Have you thought about these issues? And so to do that, you need to be informed, you need to be educated. You don't want to be speaking for the queer community, but on behalf. So you have to ask people, like, what is it that is important? And, you can find a lot of answers in our booklet. But I think for me, the biggest thing is to really reflect upon yourself and to look at the common arguments that are made that harm our community, such as you're obsessed about identity, and to reflect upon that. Like, are they obsessed about their identity, or are they just kind of like bringing something that we haven't seen before into the picture? I was just remembering, Venerable, someone recently was like, they sent me a message saying, oh, you shouldn't identify with anything. And I thought, oh, okay. And I looked at their website, and they had this bio which had so much information about them, like when they were born, where they were born, what languages they speak, what cities they've lived in, the hobbies they had as a child, blah, 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 where they studied, the things they studied, all this stuff. And that was just the short version. Then there was a link like to a fuller version. It was like pages long. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so much about you. But this person couldn't see that stuff was identification also with identity. And when trans people ask for gender inclusive bathrooms, people are like, oh, they're trying to force this stuff down our throat, they're so attached to their identity. But those people also, every time they use the bathroom, go to the same bathroom. Like, if do you always use the male toilet, Bhante? Are you obsessed with your identity? Are you trying to shove your gender down our throats? No. Do you always use the same name? Yes. Are you obsessed with your identity? No. Did you change your name? Yes. Oh, you're just eye making, So it's really important that people actually interrogate their own prejudices and look at their blind spots, because it's these things that they can't see that are actually doing harm to others. And if you want to be a good person, then you've got to see yourself clearly and really understand your own mind, and to acknowledge that if you're doing the same thing, identifying with these boring parts of yourself, like your gender, your sexuality, whatever, then you can't judge others. So to be able to see yourself clearly would be very helpful. And to acknowledge that if it's not that identification that is the trouble, then there must be something lingering there. Maybe some dislike, some prejudice. some hate. And it's your job as a spiritual practitioner, not you individually, it's our job as a spiritual practitioner to overcome that hate. So, this is part of our journey. And I think it's not only with the queer community, but also with especially women in our community. Also, there's a lot of racism in our community as well. And all of these things need to be worked on. And to do that, there needs to be an examination of self. And so that's what we should be doing as spiritual practitioners. That's like, the stuff that we need to do inside ourselves. And then the stuff that I mentioned previously about becoming more educated, being a good ally, and just normalizing the fact that queer Buddhists exist and celebrating queer Buddhists in our community for their contribution to our spiritual tradition. To value queer Buddhists is really important. And so I just want to thank you for valuing this work and wanting to talk about it and share it with your community. You'll get some flack for this, but I think you'll help people grow as well.
Yeah, Bhante, I'm just thinking about, friends and family members who I grew up with, and they had to struggle, with all this hate and directed towards the queer community. And a lot of these kind of like very, nasty jokes, and they would kind of use the jokes as a way to cover up their hate or something like, oh, I was just joking, and things like that. And it was just, yeah, it was so weird to see this. And then like within my own community, like where I grew up in the Latino community in Southern California, if someone else's kid was queer, like, oh, that's fine, but when it was their own, then it was like different, right? So there was like, I guess, a dissonance there, kind of like we have like all metaphor, all beings, but not this being, right? Like you see this kind of play out in many weird and strange ways where people are doing all kinds of gymnastics, like to kind of, like to make it work to make their hate work out. And it's just so weird. And how, Bhante, you were alluding to this, how like non-self, right? Like not identifying with anything, how the teaching of anatta and other parts of the Dhamma are weaponized and used as a way to promote adhamma, the contrary to Dhamma, right? The adhamma. So
Right.
yes, Bhante.
Yeah, and that's for me like something that I think can be overcome through discussions like this, like just interrogating some of those things. Because I do believe that the majority of Buddhists want to be kind, want to be good, want to practice Dharma correctly. And it's just sad that for some reason queer people are an easy target for an expression that maybe underlies some of their own prejudice, hate, whatever, and just becomes a vehicle for that to be expressed. I've also been surprised to see with our communities how women are treated.
Oh yes.
And to see just these like mental gymnastics, right? Of people saying things like, oh, there's no such thing as gender. Gender doesn't matter. And then making sure that women sit at the back of the hall, and refuse to give them ordination and things like that. And so we have to kind of really be aware of these this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance, start calling these things out a lot more, because unfortunately what happens is people start repeating this stuff and it just becomes accepted. And for me, that's the thing that we can actually overcome this through education and informing people a bit better. It's a shame that people don't interrogate these sorts of things in their own minds a bit more. For example, when I ordained, people tried to tell me that I couldn't be gay anymore. And it's like, I don't know if you understand how this works, but they didn't seem to think that they had to stop being straight.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, oh, no, when you become a monk, you're just a monk. And it's like, if that's the case, why do we have all these Vinaya rules?
Mm-hmm.
Why are all these rules about being alone with women? Why are there these parajikas about sex, like
Mm-hmm.
masturbation? Like, you don't just abandon your sexuality when you're ordained, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people couldn't see that, to tell me to stop being gay
Mm-hmm.
is impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't seem to think that they had to stop their sexuality. And so it's like, have you even thought about this?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the answer is no, which is why we need to talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise people keep on having these ideas that are just really harmful. Like when I was told this, like, oh, you have to stop being gay. It's like, do you realize how ridiculous that is, and how much confidence I've just lost in you, like, as a person, for not understanding how these things work? And then to have this idea that if you identify as queer, that you're somehow like going against the Dharma. And it's like, I hear people talking about being straight all the time. It's like it never really feels like a problem. No one starts to attack them. So yeah, I don't know what to do.
Well, we got some work to do, Bhante, and I'm here to support in whichever way I can. And
You're very
especially
kind.
especially where I feel that, it's very important because, the Dhamma in Espanol is like a very new territory. And I feel like we need a very good, the right foundation. We need to start off on the right foot and make sure that
Yep.
we don't perpetuate the same kind of hate and ignorance and do over the same mistakes. We should learn. We should be learning as we go along, and not just kind of repeating the same old horrible mistakes over and over and over again. So this is, Bante, why I was so happy to support you and use this as a platform, to also to let the Buddhists in Latin America and Spain know, that there is a community being built, right? Bringing awareness about Rainbodhi in Espanol also. And yes, whatever I can do to support, and just bring awareness, I think is a big thing. And so, this robe comes with some power at times. And, sometimes when people like myself and yourself, Bante, kind of speak about these issues, it gives it more credibility too, right? So we can use this kind of we can use the robes to break down these barriers and this discrimination and prejudice, and actually work on what the Buddha wanted us to work on, which was inclusion and loving kindness and compassion and deep understanding and real understanding and transcendence of identities, and not this kind of pseudo one where you use it to push people out and hurt people, Bante. So yeah, this kind of brings us to the end, Bante. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say or share with us today.
Thank you for letting me talk so much. I had a really strong coffee just beforehand and quite loquacious, but thank you. I especially appreciate it because in the last few weeks, we've had so much trolling for Rainbodhi, which is on a personal level, it's distressing because, it makes you question everything about the religion you belong to, right? And on another level, I worry about people in our community. And so seeing all of this stuff in the last few weeks, while I've been like, in a hut in the middle of Sri Lanka, and with no one really to talk to about it, I really appreciate being able to vent some of that today and to share what I've been experiencing with you and your community. And so I really appreciate you listening, and I really value that. So I just hope you understand how much that is, how much that means to me.
Thank you so much, Bhante. Thank you for joining us here again. And I hope this is just the first of many times that we can work together and support each other. And I don't know, Bhante, I don't know if how long you're going to be in Sri Lanka, but I plan to be there sometime in March. So if you're still there, Bhante, maybe I can meet up with you. I don't know.
I'll be back in Sydney by then.
Okay.
Somewhere, sometime. Somewhere, sometime.
Or if you ever come back to LA, then you got a place to stay, Bhante.
Sad.
Okay, everyone. So, yeah, may you be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful, and stay tuned and for the next episode. Thank you so much.